You know that feeling when you take that final exhausting step over a steep ridge, and suddenly, you aren't looking at your boots anymore. You're looking at the entire landscape stretched out below you. Well, welcome to that summit, and welcome to this final synthesis deep dive.
Yeah, it really does feel like we've reached the peak of this massive philosophical undertaking.
It does, right. Because for you listening right now, we are looking at the culmination of Albert Pike's esoteric masterwork, Morals and Dogma. And specifically, we are diving into its absolute pinnacle, which is Chapter 32, the Sublime Prince of the Royal Secret.
And our mission today is to finally move beyond just gathering isolated lessons.
Exactly. We want to answer the underlying question of this entire framework, which is, what does it truly mean to understand?
Right, because up until this point, the text has walked us through various philosophical schools and ancient religions, piece by piece.
We've been looking at the individual stones.
Precisely. We've been examining the stones, but Chapter 32 is where we step back to see the actual architecture of the cathedral. And this deep dive really requires a slower, more reflective pacing.
Because we aren't just acquiring new tools anymore.
No, we are examining the nature of the builder. We are looking at the ultimate synthesis of all the esoteric knowledge Pike has presented.
Okay, let's unpack this, because right out of the gate, we are hit with this title, The Sublime Prince of the Royal Secret. And to a modern ear, that sounds like we are about to uncover a hidden cipher, or maybe a literal password to some ancient vault.
I know, it sounds incredibly dramatic, like a movie plot.
Right. But looking at the source text, Pike is, as always, notoriously elusive. So what does the text actually reveal this secret to be?
Well, the royal secret is actually the ultimate subversion of material expectations. It is not an external hidden cipher, and it's certainly not a magical incantation.
So what is it then?
The profound revelation of this final chapter is an internal realization of absolute unity.
Oh.
Yeah, it is the recognition that the fragmentation of the universe, or, the rigid divisions we perceive in reality, well, that's fundamentally an illusion. The secret is equilibrium.
Wait, so if the great, profound secret of the universe is that everything is inherently unified, we have to ask why that isn't our default state of perception, right?
That is the core dilemma of the human condition, yeah.
Because if unity is the fundamental reality, why does our everyday experience feel so incredibly fractured? Why is human history defined by adversarial division?
Well, because the human intellect actually relies on contrasts to process information. We literally need to perceive boundaries.
To make sense of things.
Exactly. To understand a concept, we inherently define it by what it is not. The sources explain that our minds categorize existence into opposing forces like light and dark, physical and spiritual, or necessity and free will.
And we just mistake those categories for reality itself.
We do. We mistake these perceptual categories, which are just necessary boundaries of human cognition, for the ultimate structure of reality.
Like looking at a coin.
How do you mean?
Well, we spend our whole lives arguing about heads versus tails. We treat them as if they are completely opposing forces fighting for dominance. But the royal secret is realizing it's the exact same piece of metal.
That is a perfect way to visualize it. What's fascinating here is how deeply Pike weaves that exact mechanism into the esoteric symbols of this chapter.
Like with a Kabbalistic tree of life.
Yes, he draws heavily on that, and ancient Zoroastrian concepts too. He illustrates that these opposing forces, like severity and mercy, are not enemies locked in a war of annihilation.
Right, they aren't trying to destroy each other.
No, they are the twin pillars upholding the universe. When we view right versus wrong, or success versus failure, as absolute, mutually exclusive realities, we trap ourselves in a fractured universe.
But the text argues that the Sublime Prince is the individual who sees through that fracture, right? They recognize that light has no geometric meaning without darkness to define its edges.
Precisely. They are the in-breath and the out-breath of a singular system. Pike refers to this as the equilibrium of the universe.
And that equilibrium is the realization that these opposing forces are actually necessary complements.
Yes. The friction between them is what generates movement, evolution, and basically life itself. If you eliminate the resistance, the whole system collapses.
So the royal secret is stepping into the center of those forces.
Exactly. Recognizing their unity and maintaining your own internal equilibrium right in the middle of their pull.
Which, that fundamentally changes how we have to approach all those specific virtues outlined earlier in Morals and Dogma.
It completely upends the traditional moral framework, yes.
Because if we accept that the world is not just a collection of warring opposites, then moral development can't just be about picking your favorite virtue and ignoring the rest. We have to bring all of these disparate pillars together.
And this leads us directly into what the text frames as spiritual alchemy. The text makes it clear that wisdom is not a buffet where you just select one dominant trait.
It's not just about being, say, disciplined, but nothing else.
Right. It is the transmutative integration of all of them. The 32nd degree actually presents a really complex geometric symbol for this.
The camp, right?
Yes, the camp. It's an entagon, which is a 9-sided polygon, enclosing a heptagon, a pentagon, a triangle, and finally a circle in the center.
There's a lot of geometry to wrap your head around.
It is, but the geometry represents the systematic gathering of scattered human forces and philosophies. It pulls them from the fractured edges into a unified, integrated center.
So let's look at what is actually being gathered into that center. The text outlines some very specific pillars that must be integrated, like discipline, which is the absolute control of the self.
And subduing the passions, yes.
Right. And then there's leadership, the burden of responsibility. Compassion, which is the deep empathetic connection to others. Truth, the uncompromising clarity of reality. And courage, which is purposeful action.
On paper, integrating all of those sounds like a beautiful, harmonious synthesis.
But here's where it gets really interesting, because I have to poke back a little on Pike's premise here. We are dealing with an esoteric framework, not some modern self-help seminar.
Fair point.
In the real world, some of these virtues are inherently antagonistic. I mean, how do you actually integrate uncompromising truth with deep compassion?
That is the million-dollar question.
Because absolute truth is inherently rigid. It cuts like a scalpel, and it really doesn't care about your feelings.
Yeah.
But compassion is inherently fluid. It forgives, it softens.
It accommodates the human flaw, yes.
Exactly. So if you try to mix strict, unyielding dogma with soft empathy, don't you just get kind of a moral paralysis?
Well, that friction you were describing is the exact gauntlet the text lays down, and honestly, it is why most people never achieve the understanding Pike is describing.
Because it's just too hard to balance.
Because if you attempt to simply mix them, if you try to compromise between truth and compassion, you do, in fact, get a diluted, ineffective paralysis.
So what is the solution if it isn't a compromise?
Pike's solution is equilibrium.
Okay, explain the mechanics of that. How does equilibrium function differently than a compromise?
Well, a compromise requires both sides to surrender a portion of their strength to meet in the middle, right? But equilibrium requires both sides to operate at their absolute maximum potential.
Oh, I see.
They are held in check only by the equal and opposite strength of the other. Think of the architecture of a stone arch.
Okay, I'm picturing an arch.
The stones on the left side are falling inward due to gravity. The stones on the right side are also falling inward. If you just lay them on top of each other, the whole thing collapses.
Because there's nothing directing the force.
Exactly. But if you place a keystone in the exact center, the opposing forces push against each other with immense pressure.
They don't compromise their weight at all.
No, they use their full, devastating weight to lock the entire structure into a state of incredible load-bearing strength.
That completely reframes the challenge. The goal isn't to be, like, half truthful to spare someone's feelings, or half compassionate to enforce the rules.
Right. The goal is to possess the full, unyielding weight of truth and the full, deep resonance of compassion and position them so they lock each other into place.
Wow.
Yes. And this brings us to another critical analogy often discussed in esoteric philosophy, which is the master archer.
Oh, I love this one.
To loose an arrow with lethal precision, the archer must exert tremendous, rigid physical tension on the bow.
Right, and that tension is discipline, logic, and strict truth. It has to be unyielding.
But the release of the arrow requires a complete, instantaneous, fluid letting go, and that is intuition, compassion, and softness.
So if the archer tries to compromise, say, if the bow is only half drawn out of softness, the arrow just falls to the ground.
And if the archer is so rigid they cannot release the string, the bow is completely useless.
Equilibrium is total command over both capacities.
Applying them perfectly to serve the ultimate intent. Compassion without the discipline of truth is just enabling chaos. Truth without the grace of compassion is just tyranny.
But when harmonized, they create a synthesis that is a completely new state of being.
Exactly. That dynamic tension is the architecture of the Sublime Prince.
But this raises an important question regarding how we transition this from theory to reality. Because recognizing the architecture of an arch, or understanding the mechanics of a bow, Well, that's just an intellectual exercise.
It is. And if equilibrium is the ultimate goal, this philosophy absolutely cannot remain an academic study of esoteric texts.
It demands a brutal transition from theoretical information into practical lived experience.
It does, because in Pike's framework, truth is not a noun. It is not an object you discover hidden beneath some temple.
Truth is a verb.
Yes, it is a continuous action. The text insists that truth must be lived, and it stems entirely from constant reflection, real-world friction, and unbroken waking awareness.
This is such a vital distinction for you listening right now. We can sit here and decode Masonic allegories and Kabbalistic geometry all day, but reading about the Sublime Prince doesn't make you one.
No, it certainly doesn't.
It's the difference between memorizing the sheet music and actually playing the symphony. The notes on the page are just knowledge, but the music in the room is the lived experience.
I really like that analogy, and it aligns perfectly with what Pike calls the internal laboratory.
Tell us more about that.
Well, you spend degrees 1 through 31 looking outward, right? You're studying history, analyzing symbols, decoding the cosmic architecture of past civilizations.
Just gathering knowledge.
Exactly. But the 32nd degree abruptly turns the mirror inward. You realize that all of those external symbols were just scaffolding.
The real temple is your own consciousness.
Yes. And once the internal architecture is built, the scaffolding has to be removed. You can't just live your life quoting philosophical texts.
You have to actually embody the principles those texts were pointing toward.
Because if you cannot actualize this equilibrium within the crucible of your own mind, in the midst of your own daily grief, ambition, and conflict, then the grand philosophies of the universe are fundamentally useless to you.
The ultimate secret of the Sublime Prince is radical self-awareness.
And the mastery of the internal empire.
So we have to bridge the final gap here. When we strip away all the allegory of the royal secret, the geometric camps, the spiritual alchemy, what does living the understanding actually demand of an individual on a random Tuesday morning?
It raises an important question about the nature of action. Living the understanding actually looks remarkably quiet on the outside.
But it requires massive cognitive sovereignty on the inside.
Yes, it means acting with profound awareness. It's about intercepting your own instinct to react blindly out of anger or bias or fear.
Being able to observe those internal passions rising, recognize them as natural forces, and purposefully direct their energy.
Rather than just being consumed by them, it is the dissolution of knowledge into character.
It's the absolute cessation of autopilot.
Exactly. The individual who has truly internalized this synthesis doesn't have to consciously debate what the right thing to do is in every situation.
Because their internal architecture has been realigned.
Right, so right action becomes an emergent property of their existence. The equilibrium is no longer something they do, it is something they are.
So what does this all mean? Let's stand at the ridge and really look at the landscape of this final synthesis.
It is quite a view.
It is. For you, the listener, who has navigated through this complex, often dense esoteric material, the shift we are discussing is absolute. We are talking about moving from the frantic external gathering of esoteric trivia to the quiet internal power of profound perspective.
It is the ultimate paradigm shift from possession to actualization.
It truly is. The core philosophical takeaways from Chapter 32 are that truth is not a fractured landscape. It is a unified field.
And the adversarial divisions we perceive, the good and bad, the light and dark, are just necessary illusions of our own limited cognition.
Right. Wisdom does not come from isolating one virtue. It is the transmutative integration of all of them. Equilibrium is not a weak, watered-down compromise.
It is the highest form of dynamic, load-bearing mastery.
And above all, every piece of theoretical knowledge is dead weight until it is subjected to the fire and friction of lived experience. The entire journey was designed to point you back towards yourself.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, the profound realization of Morals and Dogma is that the end of the text is an initiation, not a conclusion.
The acquisition of philosophical information has reached its limit.
Yes, but true understanding is just beginning. You've studied the blueprints, and now you have to inhabit the building for the rest of your life. The promise of the royal secret is that truth cannot be found. It can only be become.
Something you become. Wow. I want to let that sit with you for a moment, because if truth is genuinely a continuous state of being, a live voltage running through the architecture of your character, rather than just a static fact you hold in your memory, That radically changes the stakes of your everyday existence.
It changes absolutely everything.
It means that every single mundane choice you make today, how you speak to a stranger, how you react to an inconvenience, how you extend grace to someone who has failed you, none of these are just isolated, fleeting events.
They are the hammer striking the steel.
Exactly. They are a live, continuous broadcast of the specific truth you have chosen to become. So, as we leave you today at the summit of this incredible philosophical deep dive, the final question the text leaves you with isn't about what you have learned.
The question is, what kind of truth are you broadcasting right now?
Thank you for walking this profound path with us, for pushing past the surface of the text, and for daring to seek true understanding. It's been an absolute privilege to explore this with you. Until next time.